Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech? What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus Christ in a technological age? Is it different now that we're in the age that we're in? Are there things we need to think about? And for those of you who have listened to this podcast for a while, we're at 65 plus episodes now. How could you teach others the core aspects of what it means to understand technology from a Christian point of view? To help us through this, I'm joined by Dr. Keith Plummer. He teaches apologetics, Christian theology, and technology and Christian discipleship. He actually teaches a course on technology and Christian discipleship at Cairn. And Dr. Plummer, he also served as an associate pastor for 18 years before that. He has a pastoral heart. I felt that when I met him in person a year and a half ago. He's also a fellow at the Keller Center, the dean of the School of Divinity at Cairn University, as mentioned. I'll put it this way for our listeners. He is like the Yoda of Christian discipleship in a technological age, but he has the voice of Darth Vader. Okay.
I would endorse this description. That is an excellent description of how incredible Keith is.
So welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much. I feel like I should leave now.
No, you're good. You're good. The deep voice is just epic, though.
Oh, well, that's my parents' doing. I can't do anything about that, but I'm grateful to them. But I have to say, because I would not live it down if I did not make this correction, it's Cairn.
Of course.
This is an ongoing thing. This is an ongoing thing now where Andrew gets the names of people or institutions wrong. It's almost a running gag in each episode really at this point.
I'm somewhat embarrassed by it, though. Like, I was like, I'm going to get your name right. Like, Keith Plummer. It's hard to screw that one up. But yeah, Cairn. I'll work on that. The problem is you read things first, and then when you say it, you have something different in your mind. Anyways.
Definitely.
What is Cairn? Is Cairn, what is Cairn named after?
A cairn is a pile of stones that is used in like mountaineering or trailing, where to mark a path. It's a Scottish word, and it can also be used of like a memorial marker. So a cairn is a pile of stones that are used to mark a path. The school's kind of tagline is "Walk a different path," and so that tie-in with a cairn comes in there.
So if it was in Canada, it might be called Inukshuk University.
Is that the same thing?
That's the Inuit word for what you just described.
Oh, okay.
And we in Canada, people, when you're going hiking, people will build Inukshuks, and it's just something you do. But anyways, that's a cool background. One of the reasons that I reached out to you is that I have the opportunity at my church at some point. It could have been like right now, because we had another speaker who dropped out, and they were like, Andrew, do you want to fill in? And I was like, I'm not ready for this. I need to talk to Keith first. And I just needed more time to prep. Because it's like, okay, some churches, they're navigating all these changes: AI, digital, social media, self-driving cars. There's a lot of that falls under the banner of technology. I was tempted to just limit our discussion to the digital, but there really is so many things, and even the digital going forward is going to be increasingly merged with physical devices. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people who are angsty, who are curious, and one of the approaches that I've seen happen is kind of this: a hammer comes down and it's like, watch out for this bad tech, and then the person who's working in technology hears that and they're like, well, that's not motivating to me. So there's that kind of listener that we have that cares about a good vision for technology. There's also like people who are just worried about it or anxious about it. And so if you're going into a church context and you have the opportunity to teach over multiple sessions on this topic, what do you teach them, and how do you organize your ideas?
Well, there's a group that you didn't mention in that description, and I know you can't be exhaustive, but there's also the group, and I think this is probably, if not the largest group, then maybe close to it. And those are the people who are just really excited about technology
Yeah.
without giving any thought as to how, if at all, it might be adversely affecting them. And so that's one of the reasons that I started doing what I've been doing, because you can imagine in a university context with Christian college students, a lot of them are there. And so, yeah, I think that those are the groups that we have to have in mind when we're doing it. And so how do I organize it? I'll tell you, one of the works that I rely heavily upon is John Dyer's From the Garden to the City, because in it he is offering kind of a biblical theology of technology, and he's kind of tracing technology from the major episodes of the biblical narrative: creation, fall, redemption, and so forth. And one of the things that I think is really helpful to do before even dealing with some of those questions about technology is to familiarize people with, or remind people with, those major episodes. And so what I start out with is, how do we situate technology within the biblical story? It's got to fit somewhere. Is it merely a product of the fall? Is it something that is somehow rooted in creation? And I do think that it is. I used the definition that Dyer uses, it the human activity of transforming God's creation for practical purpose, of using tools to transform God's creation for practical purposes. And so what I try to do is to get people to think, as you were saying, broadly about what technology is, as opposed to the narrow frame that we are prone to because of the digital immersion that we're in. And I tell folks that understanding technology with respect to the cultural mandate, that the technological impulse is God's idea, so to speak, in the sense of what it means to exercise dominion. But also understanding the impact of the fall on us and what it is that we desire can keep us from the extremes of what I call demonization and devouring. Demonization is what you're talking about in terms of just outright rejection and saying, well, that technology intrinsically is something that is problematic. But then the other side is devouring. So the people who demonize, I think, fail to think theologically and biblically about the cultural mandate and technology as it relates to that. The people who devour uncritically, just consume technology and are enamored with whatever is new and are thinking only in terms of what neat things can we do with this and how fast can we do it and so forth. They are oftentimes light on the fall. And then even beyond that, a lot of people who are doing work and have done work in media theory, like Postman and others, they will say no technology is neutral. And I think when Christians hear that, we automatically think of neutrality in moral terms. But Postman and others weren't speaking predominantly morally. They were just saying ideologically, every tool is going to preference and prioritize some things at the expense of others. And so there is an inescapable formative aspect to technology use. And here is where I think it's important for Christians to evaluate, are the ways that I am being formed consistent with and conducive to what it is that I know God's purpose in my redemption is, which is conformity to Christ.
No, that's really good. You can tell that you've taught this before. You have the alliteration, demonize, devour, but it's very helpful to have those two extremes set up so that people can understand, okay, wait, maybe I can fall into one of those two extremes. Another thing you referenced in there, you only need, maybe we could just unpack that idea of a technological impulse, because that impulse, it's like, wait, that's not a bad thing, what you're saying. You're saying that that's something that's before the fall. So can you just tease out the idea of a technological impulse going through these 4 steps?
Sure. When I talk with students about this, I explain it this way. I try to explain it this way, that you take that definition that John Dyer uses, the transformation of God's creation through the use of tools for practical purposes, and I will ask them, well, when you read Genesis 1, this refrain that you come across over and over again is, and God saw that it was good. So if what God created was good, why would there be any desire to transform it at all? And then we talk about how it is that while God created all things good, there are latent potentialities in what he has made, and that transforming his creation is not intrinsically a bad thing. So, for example, I say, when you cook, you're transforming God's creation. And it's not, and that cooking is a technological activity in that regard.
There's a ton of tech in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not because you're denying the goodness that is there, but you're acknowledging that there is a way that can be enhanced. So as you prepare the meal and season it and so forth, you are not making something that wasn't good. You're making something that was good better, more enjoyable, and so forth. And so I think that the idea that we were created to work the garden, to exercise dominion, I think that there is an implicit assumption that this is going to involve, to varying degrees, a transforming of what God has given. But that transformation has to be within the confines of what God has revealed in terms of what his purposes are.
Yeah, it can't get out of hand, and it's just transforming it into anything.
Yes.
Including idols, or including a whole bunch of other stuff that might come up, right?
Yes, and I know you've been doing a lot of work on idolatry in your studies, and another thing that I point out to the students is that you look at the descriptions of idol making in the Old Testament particularly, and one of the things that you see over and over is that these are described as the products of such things as craftsmanship, imagination, skill, artistry. Now, I think what's going on there is these are all aspects of what I would call the technological impulse. But what has happened is the technological impulse has been distorted, misdirected. And so I do rely on some of what Al Walters has done in Creation Regained, where he makes a distinction between structure and direction. That even with the fall, that which is distorted maintains some structure of its created goodness that is misdirected. So he says, a perverse, what is the word that he uses? A depraved human is still a human. And I would say, as it relates to what we're talking about with respect to technology, the technological impulse there's still a technological impulse, and that's part of the structure, but there is a misdirection. And so it fascinates me that even in the repudiation of idol making, there are these acknowledgments of the good of creation with respect to craftsmanship, artistry, and so forth.
Yeah, and Isaiah talking about the guy who goes and chops the wood that he uses for the fire, but then at the same time fashions into an idol that he believes is going to save him. Like, talks about all of the genuine benefits of wood and what it does for the betterment and nourishment of our lives. but it's also being taken to fashion this idol that can just be burned up, like all the
Yes.
rest of the wood that's being burned up. It can't
But
actually save you. It can't actually redeem you. But the wood
right,
is still good.
right. Now there you're dealing with the matter that the idol is being crafted from. What I was talking about, though, was the craftsmanship itself.
Okay.
So craftsmanship, artistry, imagination, skill are not themselves results of the fall.
Yeah.
They're the results
Yeah.
of creation. Idolatry takes those structural goods and misdirects them.
Mm,
Yeah. I
that's
feel like
good.
there's like in what you're saying, there's almost a call to excellence that I think sometimes Christians, it's like, oh, don't pursue, like you can't be holy through your own works. It's by faith alone. And a misunderstanding of really how salvation relates
Yeah.
to sanctification, and it can
Mhm.
kind of lead to a lack of pursuing excellence. But what you're saying is like, yeah, learn if in the evenings, like you can learn how to code. That's not wrong. You're not
Mhm.
like wasting your time. You're not, or like in the evenings, you can craft your whatever you're crafting. You can spend longer cooking that meal, slow cook it, don't just throw it in the microwave. Put some beauty and love into it. I once spoke on like I tried to connect the telos of tech to the true, the good, and the beautiful.
Mhm.
Like, because what you're talking about a directedness. And so, okay, how do we give more language to that? I tried to play it out with the technology must be true. It must reflect not a hiddenness in technology. It must be beautiful because God makes beautiful things. Yes, Eve was enticed by the look of the apple, but also prior to that, the tree was made beautiful by God in Genesis 2. But also the good, there needs to be like that moral dimension as well. But one thing that I've kind of thought about theologically is how does our current relate to our future in terms of tech? Like some people, they're a little loose with this, and they say, well, we're going to build technology that will exist in heaven. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? How do you think about? Do you think there will be iPhones in heaven? Like
I hope not.
will there be technology in heaven? Will there be, you go through those 4 steps. So what degree of our already existing technology goes forward into the eschaton?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that. I mean, to the extent that we will be working, that work will continue, that I don't think that we're going to be idle, and nor do I think that the eternal state is going to be one of, as Mike Whitmer says in Heaven is a Place on Earth, he doesn't think that it's going to be just like an eternal shine, Jesus, shine, like singing. That we're
Concert,
going
yeah.
to be judging angels. We're going to be working. To the extent, to what extent technological activity is going to, well, I won't say technological activity. I will say what specific technologies will we be employing? I don't know. But I would say that I think that technological impulse of creativity and skill and so forth, there's going to be some semblance of it, but I wouldn't want to venture a guess as to the details.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel similarly. So do you then, when you're teaching at churches, go into specific examples of you should use Facebook, or shouldn't use TikTok? It feels like sometimes you have these sessions, and I've been invited to speak at a high school event or something like that. And it's like, well, just tell us about technology or speak on whatever you want to speak on. And it's like, well, what do I say? And where do I go? And should I go into more detail? I was just talking prior to this, listening to one of the talks that you've given before, and you do sometimes like go into specifics, and then it seems to relate to all this other stuff. Like it seems like when we talk about technology, we're really talking about humanity.
Oh, definitely.
Right. So it's like you're almost kind of covering the basis of what does it mean to be human almost more than you're talking about an app, or something like that.
Yes.
So how do you talk about everything about humanity while still trying to talk about technology, because that's what you were invited to talk into? And how specific do you get?
You are right that anthropology is so interwoven with this. And I think a lot of times what's going wrong is we're asking the question of what should I use this for, or whether should I use this? And I think the prior question is, what are we for?
Mm.
So you have to deal with anthropology. One of the books that is not related to technology explicitly, but that I think is really helpful in dealing with this whole topic, Kelly Kapick's You're Only Human.
Yes.
Such a good book.
That is a book that when I first heard him, I had the opportunity to hear him kind of, throw out some of the thinking that he was doing. And immediately I was thinking, this is very much related to the discussion of technology, because he's saying that our finitude, our limitations are good parts of God's design. And so much of the allure of many technologies is that somehow we can transcend and escape the limitations, that they're something to be resisted, overcome, and so forth. And I think that starting with that sense of the goodness of limits as part of God's created design, can help safeguard us against the siren song of the frictionlessness of technology that wants to kind of exceed those bounds. Now, that raises other questions. For example, yes, we have limitations with respect to transportation. Naturally, we walk, and then we create various forms of transportation technologies. Is that in itself something that is wrong? And I would say, well, no, I don't think so. But it raises those kinds of questions that we have to get into. So my concern with the evangelical church when it comes to these discussions is oftentimes there is a very deficient biblical anthropology to begin with, and they want to immediately jump into the question of, how do we use technology? And as you pointed out, you can't faithfully answer that question without that undergirding there.
Yeah. I've transitioned a session to be like, we can talk about Facebook and social media, but let's talk about friendship first.
Yes.
Because friendship is good, and what does that look like? And sometimes friendship has to be, and I use an illustration of me and one of my best friends where it was very awkward at first, as most friendships are.
Yes.
And then you have this awkwardness. Like I basically kind of invited him on a date to watch a Matt Chandler sermon together. Like, this is 15 years ago. And it was super awkward, but I knew that we're both going to the same church. We're in the same program. We should probably be friends and talk about spiritual things. But I just was like, it's just so hard to do. And at first it's awkward, and technology tries to get rid of the awkwardness to let you think before you send that next text message, or to craft something with a GIF that's funnier than you could naturally come up with, or to use AI to assist you in a conversation, as some teens are doing now, in order to say, here's the message history, please help me, respond to this. Well, sometimes it's awkward and difficult, and that long suffering, so to speak, that awkwardness, whatever, you could use more biblical language to get at it. It's actually good, and the limitations you have are good, and that will actually make it better rather than worse. But yeah, it's hard to capture that sometimes, and it's hard to make it palatable for people, because they're thinking about do's and don'ts related to specific devices, and it almost feels like you shouldn't talk about do's and don'ts of specific devices and talk about all this other stuff.
Yes. What you're getting into is the necessity for wisdom. And, I have said that, and this is not just related to technology, but immaturity asks only, can I do this? Maturity asks, should I do this? And I think a lot of the question asking about technology is at a very immature level. And I don't mean that disparagingly. I understand, especially when it comes to parents and kids and so forth, I think there is a necessity to ask some of the, those questions. But I think all of it is really showing the necessity of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And wisdom is harder than simply saying, you can't do this, you can do this, and so forth. It's like in youth group, when everyone wants to know how far is too far.
I was just thinking of that of that exact thing.
And
yeah.
When someone is asking how far is too far, they want to know what is the length to which I can go.
Right.
They're not asking the question of, is this beneficial? Is this good? It's just a matter of, can I get away with this?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as that's the limits of our considering about technology, I think that reveals a deeper problem.
No, that's good. So you've referenced 3 books already that kind of stand out. You're Only Human, Capic, John Dyer's More Biblical Theology from the Garden to the City, which just came out with the 2nd edition. Al Walter's Creation Regained, which multiple times that has been recommended to me, and I have yet to read it. I literally have 2 copies. I have one on Kindle, one physical.
Oh, you have no excuse.
It's on my bookshelf right here. I literally am looking at it right now. And then my pastor retired and gave me a free copy. I have 2 physical copies now.
Wow.
Anyways, I'm going to get to it.
With each copy you get, your excuses decrease.
It's true. I'm going to do it. It was a year ago, just Elstra. Anyways, so what other pieces of literature would you recommend, or what content would you give to go along? Because some people are, they want the books to go with the advice. And so with parenting, it's like, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt, that's going to be a helpful one there, specifically. But when you're thinking more broadly, what are some resources?
Well, I'll tell you in no particular order, and I stacked them all up over here so I could see the spine so that I wouldn't forget. But one of the things that really interests me is some of the non-Christian thinkers who have been, I think, rightly identifying some formative issues. So people like Nicholas Carr, who's, and you're going to see my lights go off because I've got these motion sensitive lights. And no matter,
man,
these universities,
those are the
worst.
Yeah, really. Those are the worst.
This is just like, unless I gesticulate wildly while I talk and so forth, I'm not going to be able to keep them on. So there we go. So sorry about that. But Nicholas Carr's The Shallows, he's got another one coming out that I'm really looking forward to, the title of which is escaping me, but it's coming out this year. And he's going to be dealing more with social media and how our connectivity actually is creating disconnection. But Sherry Turkle, particularly her, not so much Alone Together, which I thought was a good book. The follow-up book that she did to that was Reclaiming Conversation.
Very good.
The power of talk in a digital age.
I think Reclaiming Conversation is better than Alone Together. I like them both, but yes. I think Reclaiming Conversation is slept on.
Yes.
Like people have passed that up when they should really spend some time with that.
Samuel James's Digital Liturgies. That is one that I take the students through. That's one of the required texts there, because I think he's doing a lot by way of formation. And, I think that Christians have for too long focused, as they've thought about particularly information technology, digital communication technology, we have been naive in only evaluating it in terms of content, not considering form and how it is shaping us. And so for any discussion of Christian discipleship and technology, especially as it relates to communication technology, I think that's important. I could go on in terms of someone who does some stuff with media ecology as it relates to just what she calls the epistemological crisis. Bonnie Christian, her Untrustworthy.
Untrustworthy is fantastic.
Yes. Felicia Wusong, her Restless Devices. More involved, and from someone that I don't have reason to believe that he is a Christian, but Anton Barbecay's Web of Our Own Making. That is a very, very good book. And Alan Noble's Disruptive Witness.
I was about to say, Alan Noble's Disruptive Witness better be on there still. Yes. He was ahead of the curve with that one. He was way ahead of the curve when he put that out in 2018. Still just as relevant as today as it was then.
It is. What he has to say about the two major challenges for Christians to communicate to our culture, he says, are distraction and secularization.
Yes.
And what I really like about that book, he does deal with the technological aspect to some extent, but what I like is he is saying we've got to get our own houses in order.
Yep.
With respect to that, not only individually but collectively. And so that is one that I highly recommend. And Jay Kim's Analog Church, Why We Need Real People, Places, and Things in the Digital Age, and his follow-up, which is much more of a, on an individual basis, analog Christian. But what I like about Analog Church is he is saying that our ecclesiology, how it is that we do church, cannot be governed by the values of the internet. That, and he identifies values such as efficiency, speed, and choice. And in keeping with that, that is along the lines of what we were talking about before with respect to there is no ideological neutrality with respect to technology. Now, efficiency and speed and choice are not in themselves moral issues. But depending upon what you are seeking to accomplish, to use any of those as the ultimate value by which, as you were saying before, for example, relationships are often quite inefficient. But when I say, well, efficiency is the primary good, and I am going to operate my relationships and my communications in all regards so that they are most efficient, then I think that there are other biblical values that we are neglecting. And then I think we have delved into the realm of moral evaluation and folly as opposed to wisdom.
That's good. That's helpful. Austin, I'll kick it over to you. I've been hogging the question time.
No, this has all been excellent. I think the one question that I would have, and I'm deliberately putting on the mental hat of our third co-host, Joel, who couldn't be here today, is what would you say to a student who's maybe at your university but is considering a career in tech outside of the spheres that Christian and media ecologists tend to focus on, like Christians who write on media ecology and technological discipleship? There's a cluster of subjects that tend to get focused on. They tend to be like not surface level, but just very popular level tech or media issues, like smartphones and social media or video games or things like that. What would you say to someone who says, "Hey, I am a Christian. I want to be formed with wisdom surrounding technology, but I think I want to go learn how to manage a server room for my career." Like, that's one of my best friends who does that for a school district, and I find that a lot of the stuff that I read and stuff even that I write on this subject is not exactly very relevant for his slice of the greater tech world, because it's a very specialized discipline. It requires a lot of training and education, and it's not the only field of its type like that. So what would you say to a potential student who's thinking about going into some kind of tech related field or some kind of tech industry or tech vocation, but in something that is usually not addressed.
Yes.
In the current literature on this.
Yes. Well, I would say one of the reasons that that's not addressed is because people are writing to where it is that most people are struggling. And then I would say, I think that it's very possible to enter into that vocation to the glory of God. I would say, but you should seek out some wise voices of Christians who are in that field who have written on that. So for someone like Eric Sherman comes to mind. And I can't think of, his is not one of the books that I had on my stack. Are you familiar with that?
Derek Sherman?
Excuse me?
Derek Sherman or Eric Sherman?
I believe it's Eric, but maybe
Okay.
let me see. Okay, I'm going to have to find it now because it's going to, let's see.
Okay, this is what the big podcasts do too. They always look stuff up during the...
It's true.
Oh, I can't find it.
A Christian Field Guide to Technology for Engineers and Designers. That's the Derek Sherman. But
okay, maybe it is. Is there
Eric
another
Sherman.
book by him?
Yeah, he also wrote Shaping a Digital World, Faith, Culture, and Computer Technology. Okay.
Yes, that's it. You're right. Derek, I'm sorry. Yes, that second one that you mentioned is one that I would refer a student such as you mentioned to.
Because he worked in a very specific field of technology, but then built up his excellence and did all that kind of stuff. And then later in life went over into the Christian professor world.
Yes.
What would you say, just based on your interaction with students, what would you say are some of the bigger trends that you see in their tech and media usage right now? As from Gen Z, Gen Alpha is not in college yet, but will be here not before too long. What are the things you're seeing as someone who's on the ground talking with students on a daily basis in their technology and media habits?
Well, what I see in some respects is that a number of them, and this is something that Jonathan Haidt has said, that he doesn't find too much resistance to what he's saying by people who are undergrads. They're like, yes. And he gave this illustration once where when his daughter was little and she was playing on an iPad and she came and she said, "Daddy, would you take the iPad away from me? I can't stop looking at it." And he said, I don't hear that from most of the undergrads. I don't hear them saying, as I'm talking about smartphones and so forth, he doesn't hear any of them say, "Don't take it away." They're basically saying, "I need help with this." Mm-hmm. Now, I see that many of them, I am concerned about the kinds of things that Haidt talks about, because I just see issues of social anxiety and real discomfort with in-person, uncomfortable communication, mm-hmm. and a preferencing of any kind of mediated communication to escape that. And that's a concern. Now, that's not across the board, but I see that a lot. Mm-hmm. It's the water that they're swimming in,
right?
And so on one hand, this is an exception, but I have students do a technology experiment. It doesn't have to be a fast. It could be you're going to abstain from a particular device or a social media platform. But what I really encourage them to do is take a medium that you are familiar with using and switch it out with another. Mm. So if you are, for a period of 5 days, if you are accustomed to getting your news through social media, 5 days you say, "I'm going to read a newspaper." And then make some evaluations as to what do you see in terms of any differences, benefits, drawbacks, and so forth. I had a student, she said, for 5 days, I'm not going to use my Bible app. I'm only going to use my physical Bible.
Oh, interesting.
Whether it is at class or it's in church, my devotions and so forth, that's all I'm going to do. And but they do reflections on this. And one student, let me go with the lights again. One of the students said, and it was the saddest thing that I have heard since I've been teaching this. She said, I don't want to think. And she was aware of the fact that she consumed some kind of media stimulation almost incessantly because she didn't want the downtime.
Yeah.
And as she stood before the class and said, I don't want to think because when I think, my mind goes to things that I don't want to think about.
Yeah.
I was just so grieved. And though she acknowledged that this was her situation, she didn't really want to be delivered from it.
Yes.
And it is there, it's through things like that that I tell students, you read Blaise Pascal in Pensée, where he's talking about diversion, distraction, and how it is that we appeal to busyness to anesthetize ourselves. We use it as a narcotic. And I want them to see, okay, 17th century, here's someone who is identifying the same underlying dynamic. So this isn't something that is new, nor is it something that has been created by our technological environment, but it is something that I believe has been extraordinarily exacerbated by it.
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of your curriculum, so to speak, of your teaching strategy is, on one hand, you would say, oh, you're giving them an exercise. You're getting them to focus on some new bodily routine to correct a habit. But then in addition to that, you're also having them reflect and use their minds.
Yes.
And it's the both and approach there, because I feel like some people, they so emphasize the physical habits and you just need to change your habits and fix these 5 habits and you'll be blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, yes, habits are very important and they shape us and technology shapes us through our habits with technology. Totally agreed. We just also need to think well and we need to set our minds on Christ. And, you can't read the New Testament without hitting over and over repeated refrains on think of the heavenly realms. I just this morning in 1 Peter 2, he's hitting that so clearly. And so it feels like you kind of need to do both, but giving them a clear exercise and saying, like, it'd be interesting if I do this thing at my church for a 6-week period. It's like, okay, between week 4 and week 5, give an assignment of what's the one thing that you're going to do differently for the next week. And I like the way that you left it broad so that people can make their own thing.
Oh, yeah. And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, students have been extraordinarily creative with some of the things that they have come up with. One student at one point said, I'm going to, over a 5-day period, I'm only going to base my decisions as to how I'm going to dress for outside the weather. I'm not going to pay attention to any, online, on television, radio weather reports. I'm only going to base it on the basis of the appearance of the sky the day before. And I'm just going to go by,
That's pretty sweet.
And then someone else did something where he said over a 5-day period, he was only going to pay cash for everything.
Wow.
He wasn't
that feels so weird.
that is, I bet that was very instructive at just probably how anti-cash our society has become because of how frictionless credit cards and Apple Pay are. It's like you whip out cash and coins and the cashier he's like, really? You're gonna do that? Like
and so he did this, and and they give reports, to the class. He came away with, he said he realized how much more engaged he was with like cashiers and so forth, because he said, I always went to self-checkout and I didn't have to deal with anybody. and it was, it was quick, easy. But I was finding myself now, I was actually getting in conversations with people at the store and so forth. I never would have thought of it, something like that. I thought that was such a good idea. He didn't use his Apple Pay. He didn't use his credit cards. And so he had to like take out a certain amount of money from the bank ahead of time based on what he thought he was going to be spending. And I mean, they've come up with some really, really creative things.
No, that's a great example. So I love that. I'm going to steal that respectfully.
You're welcome to it. It's not original to me, I'm sure.
I think I did see one curriculum at one university where they told the students to they had to use a sleep app for a week or whatever, and I thought that was interesting. And I was like, I don't know if like you could recommend them not to have their phone by their bed rather than encouraging them to have their phone by the bed would be my preference. But anyways, my final thought, it somewhat relates to what we just talked about, but thinking about it on a collective level as a church. So like to become a Christian, you're saved by faith alone, through grace alone. And I believe you become a member of the church with that. And so I don't believe there should be a membership bar that's too high. I'm a Baptist. I could get in arguments with my Baptist friends about that. But the reason why I'm giving that context is because I think some churches should create a kind of like, here's what we hold to. That's not membership necessarily, because membership should be easy for entry-level Christians. But there should be maybe some kind of thing of like, in our church, just so you know, here's the general norm. We don't have our phones in Sunday morning gathered worship unless we require it for AI translation or certain exceptions. We don't do this. We don't do this. We don't give phones to our kids prior to 16. We don't like, I could almost imagine some pastors, or a pastoral team thinking through, hey, maybe there's just so much going on in our culture around, maybe it's on more moral issues than just this. But I'm just thinking about a set of instructions to help have a community set of norms established within a small body of Christians so that they have certain things normalized for them that don't run down the same sort of efficiency and technological mindset, but they can kind of build some good habits instead, and doing that as a collective rather than individuals. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I think you're right. This is another thing that Jonathan Haidt points out, where he talks about collective action and the necessity for collective action. We mentioned Bonnie Christian. I know she did an editorial in CT some years back where, well, maybe it wasn't that long ago, but she said, teens and cell phones, it's a discipleship issue. And she was calling for local churches to do something along these lines to create a culture such that it wasn't simply a matter of the individual against the cultural tide, but it is us together saying, these are the things that we value, and as a result, these are the decisions we're going to make. With our students, I tell them, a lot of people look at some groups like the Amish, and they out of hand say, well, they're just anti-technology. Well, they're not anti-technology.
No,
there are certain things that they value that they make evaluations on as to how will this impact what it is that we value. Now, we might disagree on particulars of the conclusions that they make, but the process is one that I have a lot of admiration for. And I think that at the level of the local church, there really does need to be that, because I show this meme that you might have seen. It's just a photo of a guy drinking a cup of coffee. And then the caption says, there's a guy here, not on his cell phone, not on his laptop, just drinking coffee like a psychopath. And I use that to illustrate the fact that what's going on there. At one point, that would not be at all suspicious. But now, because of the tide, if you are not engaged with a device and you're just sitting there, something must be wrong with you.
Yeah.
Because you are not conforming to what has become the norm for the society. And so as churches think through discipleship on more than just an individualistic basis, these are the kinds of discussions that I think need to be had. And, people might hear that and immediately the concern would be, well, you don't want to get legalistic. And we're not, and yes, we don't want to be legalistic. This is not a matter of you're a good Christian or not if you're not doing this, but we need to be thinking through, how can we help one another?
Mm-hmm.
How can we not conform to the patterns of the world? And by that, I don't mean just not doing the same behaviors. Those things have become norms because there are certain values that have been adopted, and these are seen as almost ultimate goods. And the church needs to be questioning, do we believe that on the basis of what God has revealed? And if not, how can we help one another to resist that and to affirm what it is that really is better?
Mm-hmm. That's good. Well, that's a good word to end on. Thank you, Keith, so much for joining us. I can teach the 6-week course now at my church. I think I'm good. After I read Al Walter's Creation Regained, I got to get reading that and one of my copies, and then we'll go for there. But genuinely, thanks for your time. You're kind of like on the Keller Center. People could take courses if they go to Cairn. If they go there. Is there any other ways that people should follow you?
I am on, I was going to say Twitter. It's X. But,
it is X now. It is X now.
It's X. And my handle there is Christian Mind. It's with X. Not crossing out Christ. It's a Greek letter. XIANMIND, which is not self-referential. That is my homage to a book that had a great impact on me, Harry Blameyer's The Christian Mind. How should a Christian think? So that's one way to get a hold of me.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks, Keith. And thank you, listeners, for listening, because that's what listeners do. You've made it this far in the episode. Congratulations. You can support us on Patreon. WWJT is the after patreon.com/WWJT. We also have a Discord, and anybody can join. And Keith, I'll send you an invite too, because I haven't invited you to it yet, but you don't have to respond right now. But we have conversations with various people there, and it's kind of like a closed social media. And for whatever reason, we've had some very interesting discussions of late, from everything from the impact of the election on Bitcoin to things about Twitter and TikTok ban and things like that. Some of the stuff that we can't cover because this podcast is not intended to be like a recent news update. It's supposed to be more reflective on the greater issues in the last 6 months, give or take. So thank you for listening. Go ahead.
There's a diverse range of voices too, which is not something you always get in a Discord server. You get a lot of different perspectives in the WWJT Discord.
It's a fun time. So there will be a link to that in the show notes. Thank you again for listening. Use tech, find rest, glorify God. Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.
All right.